Now I'll ask Robert to come up and start the conversation about And Satan Came Also. Thank you, Robert.
Well, there's always an aroma in Oklahoma, right? The wisdom of the gridiron, and tonight we're going to see that. And we did have a very special panel to come for a discussion after I give a little bit of overview. They couldn't be here tonight, so I'm going to pick you and you, sir. You, sir, will be on the panel. Now, have I ever given you any money or anything of value?
Yes, you gave me an eyeglass cleaner.
Oh, I did give you an eyeglass cleaner. I was trying to make a spectacle of myself. And what is your name?
My name is Larry Johnson.
Larry Johnson.
Yes.
Okay. Well, all right. You don't mind serving as our special panel tonight?
No, sir.
And you, sir, have I ever given you any money or anything of value?
Certainly nothing of value.
There you have it. I want to set the stage for us tonight because the city that we live in now and the state that we live in now, for all of our problems, are nothing like they used to be. And we have forgotten how far we've come. And sometimes it's useful to remember that, particularly when you're trying to work your way through Albert McRill's book. Now, it isn't an easy book. It's unevenly written, but it has stuff in it that you couldn't find anywhere else. And with Larry's editing, that stuff is more accessible than it's ever been. Now, it's my theory, and Larry would know, and you can ask him later, but now, folks, this is one of the originals. This is my personal copy that I bought about 30 years ago for $100. It's been one of my better investments, Gene. And this book now, the last time I saw it on Amazon, it was $400 a copy. And my theory is that a lot of the Chamber of Commerce crowd and some of the church crowd bought all they could find when it came out, and those were not passed in the will. They were passed in the toilet. They got rid of those books. They're not that many, and they are quite valuable. And it is a remarkable tome, even though you have to sort of see, like anything, you have to see what perspective McRill is writing from. And he is not a disinterested third-person omniscient. He's a player in this game. I asked Larry Lucas if he was old enough to have known Satan personally, and he said no, but Albert McRill possibly did, or at least a personification of him. So I want to start, and I want to set the stage, not so much for all the people we're going to see in And Satan Came Also, but I want to set the stage for Oklahoma in general. And I want to go to a much better writer than Albert McRill, Oscar Ameringer, whose book, If You Don't Weaken, forward by Carl Sandburg, was a national bestseller. And Oscar Ameringer was a socialist. At one time, Oklahoma had a huge socialist party. There were more members of the Socialist Party by number in Oklahoma than in the state of New York. Now, that's how weird we were. But as Ameringer himself said, and this is really interesting, really, really interesting, and I actually used this in a kitchen debate with a communist leader in Belarus. Ameringer said, socialism grows where all other crops fail. Now, isn't that interesting? Socialism grows where all other crops fail. But the other thing Ameringer said that was fascinating is that politics is the art of taking money from the rich and votes from the poor on the pretext of protecting each from the other. So he was kind of clever. He actually married into the Hogan family, which has a different view about economics than Oscar Ameringer did. But he published his American Guardian and was quite a witty observer. He began his career as a bit of a labor organizer and an itinerant socialist. And on his first trip to Oklahoma, he agreed to speak to a crowd down near my old stomping grounds in Pottawatomie County. He had to swim the North Canadian River to get there, and then he made his speech, and he certainly couldn't get back to Oklahoma City at that time. My counselor, if I go too far, will you rein me in? And so he stayed with his socialist host. And this is what he said about the conditions he encountered. He said, "My host had replenished his wagon lantern and shown me to my room with a pleasant good night and an ominous admonition, 'Don't let the bedbugs bite.' There was no furniture in the room other than a sagging steel cot. There was not even a nail on the straight up and down board of walls on which to hang my clothes. I undressed, deposited my clothes on the floor, put on my nightgown, and lay down on the cot. I suspected a mattress under the fading gray cotton comfort, oozing cotton from 1,000 holes. There was no mattress, but there was a faded brown blanket at the foot of the cot. I was too tired to take a book out of my suitcase and read myself to sleep. I was lying in the dark thinking of how heartily I should kick the posterior of a certain person who had known all about American farmers the day before, that being himself, when I heard the whine of an oncoming army of mosquitoes. I'd encountered mosquitoes in the flats of New Jersey and the swamps of the Delta, but these Oklahoma mosquitoes were the bitingest I'd ever met. Either their auger bits sunk deeper, their appetite was sharper, or the hungry man-eaters had at last discovered the man of their dreams. I pulled the faded brown blanket over my rapidly swelling face. It was a horse blanket, and from the powerful ammonia odor it exuded, had served oftener under than on the back of the horse. Presently things began biting me under the horse blanket. They seemed to care especially for my neck, wrist, and ankles. At last I caught one of them and investigated. I had met bedbugs too before, but not these famished baby turtles. The moon was peeping through a yellow ring of clouds. I thought I saw something like grass out of the window. It was glistening wet, but anything was preferable to the axis of mosquitoes and bedbugs. Lying on the wet grass, I had escaped the baby turtles, but the mosquitoes still pursued me. The nightgown, wet as it was, still offered some protection. But now, something new was feasting on me under the nightgown. Something small and wingless. I was being introduced to chiggers. And they seemed to be exceedingly fond of itinerant socialists. And going on, he described, and some people get mad at me when I read this. This is history, folks. It's unvarnished. It's warts and all. But this is what he encountered. He said, as the days grew into weeks, I found worse than what I've described so far. I found toothless old women with sucking infants on their withered breasts. I found a hospital old hostess around 30 or less, her hands covered with rags and eczema, offering me a biscuit with those hands, apologizing that her biscuits were not as good as they used to be because with her sore hands she could not knead the dough. I saw youngsters emaciated by hookworm, pellagra, malnutrition, who had lost their second teeth before they were 20 years old. I saw tottering old male wrecks with the infants of their 14-year-old wives. I saw a white man begging a Choctaw squaw man who owned the only remaining spring in the neighborhood to let him have credit for a few buckets of water. I saw smug, well-dressed, overly fed hypocrites march to the church on Sabbath day, Bibles under their arms, praying for God's kingdom on earth, while fattening like latter-day cannibals on the sharecroppers they loaned land to. I saw wind-jamming, hot air-spouting politicians geysering Jeffersonian platitudes. Don't you love that verb? Geysering. Geysering Jeffersonian platitudes about equal rights to all and special privileges to none. About all men born equal with rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, without even knowing, much less caring, that they were addressing as wretched a set of abject slaves as ever walked the face of the earth at anywhere or any time. The things I saw on that trip are things you never forget. So let's do a quick overview of this book. Now let me carefully put this down, Jim. This is
I got mine.
All right, all right. Okay, so the first book, And Satan Came Also. Now the title of this, as Larry points out, is a little bit mistaken. This comes from the book of Job, which is the oldest book in the Bible. And it's not a Hebrew book. It is in all likelihood a book from the Edomites, which was another clever semi-nomadic tribe. And it's a story about a righteous man who served God for naught. And it's a painful story. It's a story that has some theological difficulties. You know, God sort of harvests Job's children, but it's okay. He gives him some more later. Well, it sort of doesn't ring true to us, but that's not the point of the book. The point of the book is different. And there was no Satan in the sense of Lucifer in this Edomite culture. There was Satan who was a prosecutor or an accuser. He's not a good guy. But notice in Job, God kind of enjoys bantering with him a little bit. And so it's not the Satan that we think of. This is a new model that Jim's come up with for the state capitol, I think. We have nothing to do with the state capitol project. Believe me, we're on the other side here. We're Methodists at OCU. And if you read the book, the Methodists come out okay. Albert McRill was a Methodist. But, as kind of funky as those graphics are, it sort of reaches out and grabs you, doesn't it? So, and Satan Came Also. McRill must have been some sort of literalist or an errantist, but we're not talking about Old Scratch here in Job, but we are talking about Old Scratch when we talk about And Satan Came Also. So our next slide is Albert McRill. Now, he's an interesting character, a recovering city manager himself, an attorney, a devout Methodist. It was he who announced to Oklahoma City that, I guess sort of inspired by the removal of the capital from Guthrie back to Oklahoma City, the Methodist University that had moved to Guthrie also came back here, and McRill announced that. He was a member of the Board of Trustees. He was a devout churchman and a great storyteller. And if you look at the next slide, you'll see the men's Bible study class of 1911, taught by Albert McRill. They don't look all that happy. I'm thinking maybe they could use a drink. But it got better. I mean, look at this. 1919. There were 850 people there. We have the Capitol Theater and Jazz Band down front. So this is kind of a all that jazz thing. It's just amazing. I think it's sort of a little bit of what peer pressure can do for you. And there wasn't a Rotary Club then. So this is what you had. And again, I mean, look at these guys. It's just kind of interesting. And, how anybody could turn a crowd out like that regularly. And truly there was a bit of peer pressure, and it was kind of, you needed to be seen, and particularly if you'd been seen some other places. And so there you have it. Well, that's Albert McRill. Okay, now look. This is a train back here. So this is Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City literally was born overnight. So this is what you saw. And the land run was really not the way to do something. Let's face it, Oklahomans have always liked lotteries, but they don't always work in the way you want them to. And it was really ludicrous to have people barge out, and it made more sense in town than it did in the country, because you'd go out for 160 acres of land, no roads in, no roads out. Here's this land, farm, make something of yourself. 4 out of 5 families that made the run in rural areas failed. And the real people that made money were the land speculators who bought these claims when they failed, and then moved on to speculate with them. Now there's an even better picture that's in the governor's office that we couldn't get that shows this, but literally there's a prairie field. And then overnight there are 10,000 tents and little ramshackle huts that are put together. I can't remember exactly when B.C. Clark's started, but it wasn't short. It wasn't long after that. And
2.5 years.
2.5 years. So that's sort of the beginning of Oklahoma City. You know, Kristen Chenoweth told me the other day that just going back to that last slide, that the past, present, and future met in a bar, and it was tense. Okay, well, it was tense there too, and some of the tents were pretty big, and some of them sold hooch. So, okay, well, what happened, of course, is David Payne. Anybody remember old David Payne? He was the leader of the Boomers. And the Boomers is another name for the Sooners. Some of you may have heard those terms used together. The Boomers were lawbreakers. They were people who planned to sneak in before the appropriate time and get the best land. Well, as it turns out, in Oklahoma City, and I wanted to say the real Seminole and Kickapoo tribes want to stress that they had nothing to do with this. These are not Indians. They have their own lotteries. But these people adopted these names. And so Congress had actually paid the Seminole tribe some money for part of the area that became Oklahoma City. But that's all they had to do with it. And there was a boomerish organization whose unstated charter was to violate this law and to come in and get the land before people came on and sell the lots. And that was the Seminole Land Company. And so they became the Seminoles here. And their adversaries were called the Kickers, but, you know, flattery is the highest form of praise, I guess. They decided to pick an Indian name too, and they picked Kickapoos. And so you have this ludicrous back and forth plats. You don't know which plat to be done. And then all of a sudden, the Kickapoos decide to have an election on the first day, 3 hours after people have come into Oklahoma City. There's going to be an election, and it's going to be at the Kickapoos tent. So, you know, they may not have gotten in and gotten the land like the Seminoles did, but they're going to control, they think they're going to control the politics. So it's just a remarkable time. I wrote down page 3, so there must be something on page 3. By mid-afternoon, a veritable flood of humanity deluged the town site. People of all tongues and all colors and all garbs with all brands of profanity and every imaginable odor rushed about in wild disorder, toting packs, suitcases, tents, and whatnots, wrangling and dickering, surging aimlessly in search of lots, something to eat, or more importantly, something to drink. And a while before 3 in the afternoon, wild confusion turned to bedlam when a Paul Revere dashed over the town site, blowing his trumpet and announcing that an election to choose city officers would be held in the big tent, the polls opening at 3 o'clock. We're not in the law here yet. That's why Moulman Pruitt was so successful as a lawyer. He didn't have to worry about the law stuff. This is a pre-law society that we're in. While the Seminoles and Kickers were slugging and voting it out a block away, events were happening west of the Santa Fe tracks on what would be Front Street, now Santa Fe, which marked the beginning of an underworld that has never ceased to curse this city. So let's look at the next map. Now these are the guys who are charged to be our first police department. And one of the most intriguing characters in Oklahoma history is this guy right here, Charles Colcord. And we think of Colcord as the Colcord Building, which is the first skyscraper, I think, Larry, in Oklahoma City. Now has a wonderful hotel and Flint restaurant that has the best BLT sandwich in Oklahoma. Trust me on this, I know it. And he began in law enforcement. Later went into oil and gas and real estate, and was a remarkable, married across the, we didn't have a turnpike then, but married into the Helmrich family in Tulsa, his children, and just have a great Oklahoma entrepreneur, and he was one of our first lawmen. Now, this guy here, the towering hulk of intimidation, is John Hubatka Jr., and he was in and out of the sheriff's and county offices back and forth, but as you can tell, he was kind of had a lot of business about him. We have Bud Reynolds, William R. McGill. Was he related to Albert, do you know?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Then Colkert, then Hubatka, and Abner J. Day. So that's our first police department. After that, we have a map that shows Hell's Half Acre. And you see, as McRill says, and as I said a moment ago, the best, really, the chapter that I almost think you should start with is chapter 6, entitled Satan Came Also. This sort of gives you the gist of all this. As I said, the book is unevenly written. It's hard to follow, but it still is true that there are things in here you can't mine, you can't find anywhere else. Even though, and Larry may have something to say about this, McRill had something he was wanting to accomplish with this book. It's not a casual observer. In this chapter, he says, a greater threat to a peaceful, civilized community than the outlaw bands that terrorized, plundered, and killed was Oklahoma City's arrogant underworld, with its gamblers, prostitutes, and hordes of toughs who swarmed about the unregulated saloons and dives, flourishing and ruling almost at their pleasure. Influential businessmen and newspapers not only defended, but actually fought for a wide-open town, while big-time gamblers, haughty madams, and arrogant saloon keepers told politicians and public officials what to do and when to do it. And if you've read the book, you know that the police were so corrupt that when they were going out to issue writs and warrants for the gamblers, they would drive a certain way and turn at a certain corner, which was word to all the gamblers to take all the machines and stuff and hide them in the basement or hide them in the attic. So they'd have all these, it's like Robbo and the Seven Hoods, if any of you are old enough to have seen that movie. In that movie, the set sort of turns around and all the tables vanish. And that's what happened here. There was wide open booze and gambling and Delilah's scarlet women out. And then all of a sudden they'd be gone, and there'd be a couple of guys playing dominoes or something like that. You know. That's where the old expression came, if you find any dominoes, take them. No, that wasn't it. Okay, so, but I loved, and a couple of things that are so interesting about this period. Number one, for those of you who've played around with the book, do you notice how short the prison terms are and how easily people are pardoned? I mean, this is Oklahoma. We send everybody to jail forever here. But, Al Jennings was a convicted bank robber who ran for county attorney and then later ran for governor and almost won on the Democratic ticket. So, but the other thing that I love is this sort of florid language that the writers use. And in chapter 6, he talks about a pioneer Oklahoma City lawyer, Colonel D.W. McMartin, who represented a bunch of the unjustly accused underworld, the residents of Hell's Half Acre. And he said, describing what he saw in his book, 30 Years of Hell, he said, the spectacular array included the Kansas Jayhawker, the Arkansas Reuben Glue, shaking with the buck egg, the Missouri Puke. Now, thankfully, Larry looked this up. We're not completely sure where that came from, but we think it was from Illinois or Indiana.
Right.
And once Missouri was called the Puke State by it was the other side. We know it as the Show Me State, but the Texas Ranger, the Illinois Sucker, There were nesters, horse thieves, train robbers, hijackers, bank raiders, yeggmen, ragamuffins, and vagabonds, mule skinners from Texas and high skinners from Bingville, spellbinders from Kansas, and high binders of Missouri. Now listen to this limpid prose. Joints where the besom of destruction was dispensed sprang up as if by invisible wand of some magic Circe, together with gambling hells of mushroom growth. Honkatonks and hurdy-gurdies of salacious flavor opened their flaunting doors, wherein racy females with meretricious visages and libidinous ensembles dawdled about and initiated the novitiate in vice and separated him from diamonds and dollars, provided that he had any. They don't write like that anymore. You don't see that in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, you know. So McRill goes on to include, every important city has its Hell's Half Acre. Living up to its reputation for always doing things in a bigger way, Oklahoma City Hell's Half Acre covered a whole city block. In fact, it covered more than that. And there were other things outside the block, Big Ann, Old Zulu, the Duel, which we'll talk about later, Noah's Ark, all of these things. That was kind of an exciting time to live. You know? Okay, I'm just getting wound up here. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, now this was the famous Orient Bar, where people went to become disoriented. And you will note that this is a spitting image of the bar, and there are the cuspidors. You know, I'm sort of glad those went away, aren't you? But, you know, that's not so bad a looking bar. You know, I like the tin ceiling and all that stuff. And anyway, so that's the Orient Bar. Let me see, did I have anything else? Okay. All right, now next, this was Big Ann. And McRill describes her as attractive. But she was kind of cool. Her first husband jilted her, and she married a little guy. I feel sorry for him. And she got some money, and she developed this amazing kingdom. And let me see, he described her. But wider than Hell's Half Acre, and the crime center of the first magnitude was Big Ann and her empire on West 2nd Street, a conglomerate red light district extending west from Hudson to the city limits and fittingly called Harlot's Lane. Now, Big Ann and her bagnio was near the end of the lane, a combination dance hall and licensed bar and bawdy house. Big Ann, whose true name was Mrs. Ann Wynne, was the brains of the half-world. And she was the most influential force in the city's underworld, issuing orders to county and city authorities, laughing at enforcement officers, wrecking city administrations right and left, and snapping her finger at the courts. What a jerk. An attractive, militant blonde of commanding size and presence, strong-willed, shrewd, a product of the Colorado mining districts. That's about all you need to say. She was a power in the vice and political domains of Oklahoma. She was born in Illinois in 1863, one of a family of 18. At 17, she and a girl companion traveled in a stagecoach to Leadville, Colorado, with a motley group. A lawyer, a merchant, a preacher, a gambler, and 3 girls from the half-world. That would be your scarlet women. Leadville was at the peak of its lawlessness, with the violence and crime so common that the newspaper styled the period the reign of the footpads. Now, I pause one moment. I have often said that my former court, the 10th Circuit, was the highest court in the land because it was Denver, 5,280 feet. Actually, Leadville is the highest court in the land. Leadville is higher than that, and there is a courthouse in Leadville. It was not functioning at the time of Big Ann. So, the influence of Big Ann was not confined to the city's underworld. She had important contacts in business and social circles. Big shots, civic leaders, and politicians were ready at the drop of the hat to rush to court and make her bond. I mean, several times the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce goes and makes the bonds of these people. This is before Stanley Draper. There was sort of a paradigm shift. Stanley Draper never did that we know of anyway. But that's what it was. And Oklahoma City was pretty much always wet. The county voted dry, but people wanted stuff to happen here. Bootleg joints, honky-tonks, beer taverns, gambling halls, nightclubs, teenage banditry, outlawry, in all its forms, testified to the unabated power of the gargantuan monster who came early and has stayed late, continuing to play the leading role in intriguing drama and interpreting with low comedy and high tragedy. So, it was an interesting time. The police were on the take. Many times, those of you who've read the book, you find the chief of police raids a joint and finds his people there, And, we'll come back. I got some more stories. I got to move on here. Okay, let's see. I still don't think Big Ann was all that attractive. Okay. So, Larry Reedy. Boy, now here's your Mephisto. This guy was the poll inspector in the 4th Ward. And he just made the votes come out the way he wanted to every time, and everybody just, duh. And so the 4th Ward was always the last one to come in. And it would always make the change. Now, Reedy was a Democrat, but he had the courage of his non-convictions. He could be bought. He could be talked to. And the only person in court in Oklahoma City more than him was Old Zulu, the black woman who didn't have as many legal resources and as many friends. But Larry was in court, but he always got out. One time he got out and he went downtown singing, "Our jail is made of tin. Yo can walk right out again as soon as yo get in." Now, it didn't go very far. It's not as successful as the B.C. Clark jingle. But so even Kate Barnard, our angel Kate, the sainted Kate Barnard, the first woman elected to a higher office in the country by when only men could vote. She was elected Commissioner of Charities and Corrections. Even Kate Barnard wrote a letter on behalf of Larry Reedy. So in episode 30, all the chapters on Larry Reedy are just worth reading. This guy was amazing. At one point, he worked for a holy cause, and that is he bought and sold votes to move the capital from Guthrie to Oklahoma City, and everybody liked that. He wasn't really needed. That was an election that didn't need to be bought. There was just and my hometown Shawnee ran a distant third. So, but anyway, then Larry Reedy, Mayor Ed Overholser, for whom Lake Overholser is named, not for Henry I. Overholser, but for Ed. Larry announced when World War I came out that all you vagabonds, need to go to war. And Reedy, bless his heart, did go to war and was actually a hero and did some really cool stuff and saved a lot of people's life. But he came back, and that wasn't remembered, and he was asked to leave town. And as a couple of city officers took him to the railway, one of them mused to the other, "This man has elected more people than any church, than any women's Christian temperance union, than any Chamber of Commerce group. This guy has elected more people than anybody else." It was kind of interesting. Once I went with my uncle, Charles Henry, who had been in the state legislature when he was 21 and then later went back and was county judge. And they were having an auction at the courthouse. And at the Pottawatomie County Courthouse, they were auctioning a bunch of old stuff. And my uncle waited all day, and he ended up with 2 ballot boxes, Bales 1 and Bales 2 precinct. And I said, "What in the world did you buy those for?" And he said, "I never carried those damn boxes, and now I own them." So, okay, well, the next slide is kind of a neat one. Golly, there's so many freaky things. Law in order was just crazy. I once talked to Ray Young, the Y and really most of the T and G of teaching Y, Ray Young, and he talked about the Dawson gang, and after they were later captured and killed and sent to jail, they found oil on their farm, and they would have made more money if they just farmed and done the oil. I mean, people would rob banks and get $50, you know, and then their mother would come into Ray's shop and buy hats. He could always tell when there'd been a bank robbery because they'd lose their hats and they'd come in and buy some more hats. So there was a lot of rip-roaring stuff going on. I mean, Gunsmoke dressed it up. It wasn't anywhere nearly as fun as all that. So here is Bob Ford, who invited Jesse James to his home and shot him in the back of the head to make a deal he made a deal with the governor to turn Jesse James in. He was immediately charged with murder and pardoned by the governor. So this happened a lot. But Ed Red Kelly, who was really O'Kelly, he was adopted by a guy named O'Kelly. He was a good friend of the James brothers, and he swore eternal revenge on Bob Ford, and finally found him and shot him with a double-barrel sawed-off shotgun. And he was sentenced to prison, and he was released because there was a petition with 7,000 signatures asking to release him. People didn't want the sumbitch that shot Jesse in the back. You know. They didn't like him. And so they wanted Kelly to be released. Well, he was released, and he came to Oklahoma City. Ed Kelly was 50 years old, 6 feet tall, red-haired. He resembled Bob Fitzsimmons, McRill tells us. This was the British boxer that had 59 knockouts out of 99 fights. That's pretty good, especially for a Brit. Number 8 on the greatest punchers of all time. So he was a pugilistic fellow. And he and Joe Burnett got in this battle, and it waged for hours, a couple hours, or...
There was never really a time, stated, but it was, just this grueling man-to-man combat for seemingly hours.
Yeah, and so Kelly's sidekick comes out and fires 4 shots and runs away, and Burnett's telling everybody, I'm a policeman. Help me. This is kind of what we're going to get into now that everybody has guns now. I'm a policeman. How do you know? Everybody's got a gun. So Burnett gets his ear bitten almost off, but finally he shoots Kelly, and thus the cycle of Bob Ford and Jesse James comes to an end, and it happened right here in Oklahoma City. So, okay, we'll turn to some upholders of the law. The one that I think of most is William Bill Tillman, Big Bill Tillman, whose wife Zoe was the kind of wife you want to have because she sort of took his reputation and really made something big out of it. He was actually killed in Wewoka. He was shot. He was unarmed. He was a pretty big, tough guy, and he was taking a crook to the clink, and the guy shot him. But he was a legendary lawman. You have done a sculpture of him, Harvey Pratt, which I have a small copy. So, legendary lawman. And Bob Turner, I think, was the first of the Turner clan that was actually a celebrated and good clan that did a lot of good stuff for Oklahoma City. Judge Edgar Vaught, who was a federal judge who did a lot of cool stuff. And some of the judges that actually came through and were pretty consistent, did some good work. Next, Salty editors. You have Sam Small. Now, I didn't know this, but he was Baptist, wasn't he?
I think so, yeah.
He looks Baptist. I say that as a Baptist. He founded the Daily Oklahoman, and was quite the campaigner, and well, that's quite a mustache, isn't it? And so, and here is E.K. Gaylord, and it says here, his courage and vision built an empire. But Larry might tell you that this is a bit of insurance, because McRill had his issues with Mr. Gaylord. And so that might have just been sort of a forgive me for some of this stuff I'm getting ready to say in this book. But, and then let's go on. They love to fight. Okay, now, Henry Overholser, what a character. I mean, he was wet and proud of it, and really was a major force in Oklahoma City. And then some of the various reverends, and of course Bill Murray, and I'll come back to him in a minute. These folks did love a fight. And now, let's see, next. Now we don't have Jack Walton there, but Jack Walton was mayor of Oklahoma City. He too started out as a socialist and an anti-Klansman, and then later joined the Klan. He was about as corrupt as they could possibly be, and he later became a corporation commissioner. Can you imagine that? He was impeached as governor. It was not easy. They had to put a machine gun on top of the room where the legislature met to impeach him. And Oscar Ameringer had initially supported him, and he was just heartbroken when when Walton betrayed him. He betrayed everybody. I mean, this guy was unbelievable. And so Ameringer, who was well-read, wrote an editorial just kind of bleeding from the heart, and he quoted the great poet Robert Browning, who was musing what happened when one of the other poets left their ranks to accept the office of Poet Laureate of England. And Browning felt betrayed by this fellow bohemian. And so, in our last issue of the Leader, Ameringer says, we bade farewell forever to our Jack. They called Jack Walton our Jack. And I ran a quotation from Browning's The Lost Leader. The quotation read, "Just for a handful of silver he left us, just for a riband to stick in his coat." Walton was in the governor's mansion when a copy of our paper was left on his desk. He rang for his secretary. "Go and find out," he commanded, "who this son of a bitch Browning is, and give him some sort of job that will close his mouth." With all the other things, Walton wasn't very well read. So, let's see. Let's move on. And they love their politics. Okay, here is Al Jennings. Why in the world Teddy Roosevelt pardoned him, I don't know. A bank robber who ran for county attorney and almost became governor. Gomer Smith, some of you know him. Moman Pruitt, 323 capital trials, about 320 acquittals. This guy was dangerous. And he was sort of early day Gene Stipe on stilts. I mean, he could do anything before a jury. I once went to hear Gene Stipe argue before a jury. I mean, this guy was unbelievable. The literary reference, the Bible, Shakespeare, you know. And Pruitt was the same way. He once got in a gunfight with Temple Houston, the son of Texas's founder, Sam. And, you know, there wasn't a whole lot of law there. He had one person sentenced to death. And Pruitt mortgaged his home, took the money, somehow got in to see the Attorney General of the United States, and got the president to pardon him. Now, Mike Turpin says a good lawyer will either get you out of jail or get in with you. That's sort of the moment Pruitt. And he was, they tried to name a county after him, Moman County, but it didn't happen. I don't think we have a Moman County, do we? Okay, let's move on. Alfred P. Murrah, the great 10th Circuit Judge. Anton Klassen, really the founder of the idea that became OCU and the streetcars, and Klassen Wischartel. Colonel George Shirk, one of the great mayors, and then Edith Johnson. I've got to tell you something about Edith Johnson. Now, Edith Johnson was the social editor of the Daily Oklahoman. It was Miss Edith Johnson. And she was very prim and proper and precise. And in a serious political blunder, the Oklahoman chose her to try to unhorse Bill Murray's 1930 campaign for governor. Now, Bill Murray had been in Bolivia with a socialist colleague. It didn't work in Bolivia. Most stuff doesn't. And he came back here with no money and announced to run for governor in 1930 with his cheese and crackers campaign. And he was really abysmally dressed. He always wore his long underwear, and he hiked his trousers up a little bit so you could see it. And his coat, his jacket was always spattered with tobacco, chewing tobacco. And the only thing, Murray is just a complicated character. I mean, it was good that he helped Oklahoma become a state. He was blatantly racist. He was blatantly anti-Semitic. If you find Murray's books, it's more rare to find one that isn't signed than one that is. Nobody bought this crap. He would give it to people, you know. He once traded Ameringer for a book, and Ameringer did it because he felt sorry for him, and Ameringer said, "You're getting the better end of this deal," you know, and he was. But, so he's a complicated character. I'm not going to go into whether he was good or bad. So at one time, the Oklahoman decided to get Edith Johnson. Now, Edith is described there as columnist of hope and inspiration. Well, in 1930, it didn't work all that well. The campaign began, and guess who Murray was running against? Anybody remember? I mean, this is about as far as you can get. Bill Murray versus Frank Buttram. So you have dignified, well-to-do, thoughtful, you know, coherent guy, Frank Buttram, and you have alfalfa Bill Murray. And so the big city press was all for Buttram, and they labeled Murray a Texas Ranger type B. And the Daily Oklahoman printed a front page editorial, used to do that, an unconscionable liar seeks the office of governorship. Sort of draws a line, doesn't it? Murray responded by calling the Oklahoman and the Oklahoma City Times, its companion paper, the twin harlots of 4th and Broadway. Okay, they said they'd sell their soul for a nickel a copy. So it goes on, and the Daily Oklahoman finally decided that Murray's unkempt appearance, particularly his long underwear, would be his undoing. And so they assigned Miss Edith Johnson to attack him and give him a dressing down, shall we say. So she began her lurid columns. This is what she said. Murray is a man who despises soap and water, who lived for years in a house without a bathtub. Folks, this is Oklahoma in 1930. A lot of people didn't have bathtubs. And is a man who never wears a coat unless the weather chills him. Now that's a really nice insult, isn't it? Now you, sir, would never wear a coat unless the weather chilled you. I like that. I think that's pretty classic. She said he lived contentedly for many years in a house with a sod floor. Again, so did a lot of people, you know. She charged that Murray ate one of his favorite dishes, hotcakes, in a socially unacceptable fashion. He picks up a cake with his right hand, slops it onto his left hand, reaches for the butter, picks it up with his right hand, and smears it over the cake, his hand dripping with the melted butter. She said Murray would live like a hired hand. Referring to remarks that Murray had made partly in jest, she said that he would live in the garage at the mansion and plant potatoes on the lawn. He would turn the governor's mansion into a potato patch. Well, as I said, she was not the best person to lead the charge in these particular times. And Murray turned the corner, turned the tables, much like Franklin Roosevelt did with the Fala piece. You remember when they attacked his little dog, Fala? He said, everybody leave this alone. This one's mine. And that sort of, Roosevelt was tired and sick, and the Fala thing reinvigorated him, and people started playing, you got to quit kicking my hound around, you know, and it gave FDR so Murray announces that he's going to give a huge speech in Oklahoma City. All the press is there. I think about 50,000 people lined up. And they put all the microphones and everything. And he had spread this joke around. All his minions had spread this joke. what's the difference between a bachelor woman and an old maid? And he said, a bachelor woman has never been married, and an old maid has never been married or nothing. And so then, as he begins, I think there were about 20,000 people there. He says, a bachelor woman, and titters, you know, he said, a bachelor woman writing in the Daily Oklahoman has taken a fallout with my underwear. She said that I don't wash it. Now, I wonder where she learned that. I gave my clothes to a porter at the hotel thinking he sent them to a laundry. Anyway, I want to assure you that I do not know so much about her underwear. And if I did, I would be too much of a gentleman to tell it. He says, Sister Edith says I got dirty drawers. I'm surprised at Sister Edith showing such an unseemly interest in my drawers. Imagine a maiden lady like her doing such a thing. What the hell does Sister Edith know about my drawers? Nothing, not one damn thing. I tell you something else, she ain't ever going to know anything about my drawers. Because she ain't my type! Well, Murray won big and carried Thomas Pryor Gore with him. So, okay, moving on. We're almost to the end here. So, here are some of the heroes. I admit, I like judges. Some of my best friends are judges. But they actually did a good job. City Manager McRill is speaking here in 1932. He had one of them coupe d'etats, you know. He was thrown out in a coupe d'etat. You know what a coupe d'etat is? And the Daily Oklahoman actually praised McRill for what he did. And then, so let's move on to the last map. And I just want to show, there the old Jack, our Jack is. Wow. Unbelievable, the Klan stuff that he did. So, here we have Big Ann's. Here we have Kate Barnard's house. What idiot told the Schlitz Brewery to build a saloon by Kate Barnard's house? Oh. You know, of all the people, you could choose any minister to do it. You know, you could choose the chief of police. But when you picked on 98-pound Kate Barnard, you were finished, you know. So they built it. She was there first. They built it, and it horrified her, and she managed to get it done. So here is the Vendome, the most luxurious place, and it's right opposite the City Hall. Well, sometimes things change. So here's, let's see, where's the duel? The Burnett Kelly duel, the Vendome, City Hall, Big Ann's tent, Schlitz Garden, Kate Barnard's house. Okay, so let's take a look now. There's the City Hall. It's the Sheridan. And there's the Vendome, the Renaissance. And there you see, they're still side by side, and they both have bars. So, now this I think is really cool. I haven't had a chance to tell Ron Norick, who's the chairman of the board at OCU. He's in Arizona right now. The site of the duel is where the Ron Norick Library is. Oh. So I think, you know, they still have fights there, but not with guns. And almost no books are banned anymore. So, anyway, I think that's kind of cool. Now, there's our angel Kate Barnard, Catholic when it wasn't particularly popular to be a Catholic, woman when women couldn't vote, led the ticket for Commissioner of Charities and Corrections, got more votes than Haskell did. Haskell and Murray hated her and made her life miserable. She's criticized today by some people. Some women say she wasn't a feminist, and I sort of see another view. She was like Mother Teresa. I mean, she was interested in the poor, and she killed herself. She killed herself. I mean, she didn't commit suicide. She just worked herself to death, and finally resigned because she knew Murray and Haskell would destroy her department if she stayed there. So I think she was kind of a neat person. And look at her house now. There are no scarlet women, just some scarlet Nandina there by the convention center. Now, the convention center also had, now here's Big Ann's tent, I'm sorry. And another interesting chapter here is Queenie the Stripteaser. If you want to see how dumb men can be, read that chapter. It is unbelievable. We were having a cattlemen's conference, and so somebody hooked up on this idea of Queenie the stripteaser, who I think took things to a new level. I don't think anybody, well, she was from Chicago. They know how to do it there. And I think she was talented in many ways. And she did her little act for the cattlemen, and these business types, they got their wives to take the cattlemen's wives out, and they didn't tell them what was going on. And there were a lot of women who were really steamed after this, And in that night, what Queenie did is only Queenie could do. This will go down in Oklahoma history. 10,000 bottles of beer were consumed that night at her performance. So there you have it. Queenie, this bud's for you. So, and that's where Big Ann's fire. So as you can see, I think we may have Satan a little bit on the ropes right now. Things look pretty good. And now we'll open for questions, comments, but first of all, comments, Larry?
No, you covered it pretty well. I'll answer any question.
Okay. Jim?
No, I think you've covered it very well. I mean, I'll be interested to. Albert McRill wrote at a time that he could not see that really we had gotten over this. He thought we were still a very, very corrupt place, and that the powers of illegal liquor and gambling and prostitution were still in control, and City Hall was pretty rotten most of the time, and the city manager system didn't work very well. And had he lived another 10 years, he would have begun to see the change. And it's interesting how he was right at the cusp of that.
Well, it's also interesting, I think it was Santayana that said those who don't read history are doomed to repeat it. Some of this stuff could come back. I mean, right now, we have a city council that works together in a remarkable way. And, factions could come back. Factions could come back. And, it's a lot easier when people work together. It's also a lot easier when they're not on the take. And, it's interesting. Will Rogers famously said that Prohibition was better than no whiskey at all. and that Oklahomans would vote dry as long as they could stagger to the polls. Well, we got Prohibition, and we traded 30 saloons for 700 bootleggers. It was the only profession, to my knowledge, that had 24-hour service 7 days a week in Oklahoma. You could get to your door. You could get Johnny Walker. It was amazing. And it's kind of interesting. One of the people who played a great role in ending this mess just passed away not too long ago. Leland Gorley. Yeah. Under J. Howard Edmondson. Edmondson said, this has got to stop. And he put Leland and the so-called crew cuts out to tear this stuff up. And we had liquor by the wink, and they changed it. They confiscated stuff. They confiscated gambling. They confiscated whiskey, and and said, "Hey, okay, you really want Prohibition? You got it." And it turns out people really didn't want it, and so that it was a remarkable time. Okay, come on, somebody. We got these experts here. Yes, sir.
I was disappointed that McRill stopped at 1955 and was painting the city council as very unfavorably. Had he gone a little further, in the early 60s, there was a citizens reform group called the Association for Responsible Government that elected a slate of 5 and took over the city council.
Right. Pete Petrie was in that group, I think, and
FC Love, Franklin,
and
Ben Franklin, and
Harry Dupre.
Yeah.
And later Jack Welch, who was the president of OCU, became the mayor.
And now that's right. And remember also O.A. Cargill in here, the self-righteous O.A. Cargill, who was mayor and self-appointed moralist. He's the guy who bribed the Supreme Court. Yeah. He's the guy who bribed the Supreme Court, and in response to that, we created, and Bellman and Bartlett were both instrumental in the final versions of this. We created an attempt to not have elections, to create a judicial nominating commission. I think it needs some tinkering now, but I think we can fix it. Elections for for appellate judges are tough because lawyers raise money, and and it's better to figure out a better way, and that's why we went to that Missouri system, because Corn and Welch and several justices on our court were corrupt. And Cargill, there's this book. What's the title of that peon he wrote?
I don't remember the
there's
exact title,
this-
but it's something like righteousness and holiness or something like that. It's very.
I just think some of these people don't believe in God. They write this stuff about, it is a tear-jerking about how moral and upright he is, and this guy was bribing the court as a lawyer, as an officer of the court.
Well, in response to the question, McRill didn't live long after he wrote this book, and he wrote as far as he knew, and then he died within a year, I think, of when the book was written.
Did you find it hard to read?
Yeah.
It's a little jumpy. Yes, sir.
Now, when this book was published, wasn't there a strong reaction to it, a negative reaction to the
Oh,
book?
yeah.
And they wanted that book destroyed. Did they have a lawsuit over it?
I don't know whether there was a lawsuit.
I couldn't find one. I'm not a lawyer, but I did my best legal research. I couldn't find a suit.
And there was always
He
that
died
rumor,
so soon.
but I don't think so.
Larry, would you sign any books that aren't signed? So here's the editor, and if you.
It's Larry's annotations that make this
Yeah.
tolerable.
Yeah.
And
You
But-
couldn't follow it otherwise.
But for people that, it's just kind of interesting. We see this city now, and it's a city on a hill, and it just hadn't always been that way, and it could slip back. You have to be wary. You sort of have to know. You have to know this history. I mean, drugs are somewhat in the position that alcohol was in those times. Constantly have to watch that. But it's kind of good to be living in this city now. And yes, sir. Harvey.
One thing, Your Honor, D. Cordray paid 50 cents for his first edition, and Satan came also.
And
I'll-
about 30 years ago.
I'll triple your money right now. Could we play some Pharaoh? All right, thank you one and all for coming. I hope you'll come see some of those.
thank you, guys. Good job.
Boy, that's been a lot of